Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We're up to Perek Tet Zayin, Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbaev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. This Mishnah teaches what to do if others come to extinguish a blaze. The Mishnah begins, Ovet Kochavim Sheba Lechabot. If a non-Jew comes to extinguish a blaze in a Jewish home on Shabbat, and omrim lo kabeh, we may not say to him, extinguish. And the Rav explains because it is rabbinically forbidden to tell a non-Jew to perform melacha on one's behalf on Shabbat. V'al techabeh, but we also don't have to tell him, do not extinguish, mipnei she'en shvivato alehen, because responsibility for the non-Jews resting from melacha on Shabbat is not placed upon Jews. Meaning, the commentators explain, the Torah does not require us to stop a non-Jew from performing melacha on his own, even for a Jew. And the Tiferet Israel explains, the commentators explain, that rabbinic law, however, generally requires objecting to a non-Jew performing melacha for a Jew's benefit. But in our case, even this doesn't apply, because we assume that the non-Jew extinguishes the fire because he expects to be rewarded, so he actually extinguishes it for his own benefit. Aval katan sheba lechabot. However, if a Jewish child comes to extinguish the fire on his own, and shamin lo, we do not listen to him, meaning we must stop him. And the commentators bring down the Shulchan Aruch in chapter 343, Halacha 1, that it's certainly forbidden to tell a child to extinguish the fire. But even if he comes to extinguish the fire on his own, and shamin lo, we do not listen to him, meaning we must stop him, because responsibility for the child's resting from melacha is placed upon Jewish adults. And the commentators explain, the Torah in Sefer Shemot chapter 20 pasuk 10 commands that on Shabbat you shall not do any work, you, your son, and your daughter, meaning that a father must stop his young children from doing melacha on his behalf. And since we assume that a child volunteers to extinguish a fire in his home only because he knows that his father wants him to do so, the father must stop him. By rabbinic law, even other adults who are not the father must stop a child from extinguishing their fire on Shabbat. And that is the end of Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin now continues. The previous two Mishnayot detailed actions that may be taken to prevent a fire from spreading. This Mishnah, Mishnah Zayin, describes a permitted way to stop a flame from creating a fire, and along with this, the Mishnah discusses taking a similar action in order to prevent other items from causing harm. Kofin ke'aran gabe haner, we may turn over a bowl and place it over a lamp, so that the flame in the lamp will not catch onto the beam in the ceiling and set it on fire. However, the Tiferet Israel says one must make sure not to extinguish the flame by placing the bowl over it. Therefore, you must leave some space between the bowl and the lamp. Now, although the beam is muktzeh, we may move the bowl in order to protect it. And the commentators explain that our Mishnah is teaching the principle that we may move a permissible item even to protect a muktzah item. And this is actually a machloket subject to a dispute in the Gemara in page 43a in Masechet Shabbat. The Rav goes on to explain how other opinions explain the Mishnah, but we're going to continue. Val tsoa shel katan, and we may also place a bowl over chicken excrement. How the Rav explains it, he says, Lav tsoa shel nar katan kamar. We are not talking about the excrement of a child. Da gerev shel reihu, because it's a putrid item. You're allowed to physically remove it and take it to the garbage. Elachi kamar, rather what we're talking about, valtsoa shel tarnagolim, the excrement of a chicken, katan, in order that the child shouldn't play with it and get dirty with it. So again, valtsoa shel katan, and we may also place a bowl over child excrement, which often, like we said, draws the interest of a small child, so that he does not play with it and soil himself. And this is how the Gemara explains what the Mishnah is referring to. Now, although the excrement is muktzeh, we may move the bowl in order to cover it, as the Mishnah Berurah brings down as well in chapter 308 in Orach Chaim, Siv Katan 135. V'ala krav shelo tishoch, and we may also place a bowl over a scorpion to trap it, so that it does not sting, even if its sting is not deadly, but only painful. Now, there is no biblical transgression of the melacha of trapping here, since the purpose of trapping the scorpion is not to make use of it, but only to keep it away. And the commentators bring down that trapping the scorpion in this case therefore would be considered a melacha she'ena tzricha legufa, melacha not needed for its defined purpose. And obviously this Tana follows Rabbi Shimon, who holds that there is no biblical liability for performing such a melacha, while rabbinic law ordinarily forbids trapping even for this purpose. It's allowed when necessary to prevent pain. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Maaseh ba lifnei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ba'arav. There was an incident where someone trapped a scorpion with an overturned bowl, and he came before Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai in Arav, a city in the Galilee. Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, Choshashni lo mechatat. I fear for him that he is liable to bring a chatat offering. And the commentators explain because Rabban Yochanan was afraid he may have transgressed the biblical law, even though his purpose was only to keep the scorpion away. And we see from that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai maintained that there is biblical liability even for performing a melacha not needed for its defined purpose. Only if the scorpion's sting would have been deadly would he have been allowed to trap it on Shabbat. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, if you see the Mishnah, he said that he feared that the person who trapped the scorpion was liable to bring a chatat offering, but he was not sure. And that's because he didn't know whether or not the scorpion had a deadly sting. If it had a deadly sting, then trapping it was entirely permitted, since we know saving a life overrides even biblical prohibitions on Shabbat. And just to go back to explain that case with the tzoa shel katan, the putting the bowl over the chicken excrement, if you look at the Rav, he explains that the case is talking about kegon shetzoa zu munachat be'ashpa shebechatzer. This excrement is in a trash in the courtyard. Delo ramya kameh. It's not really near the person. V'lag garav shel, and therefore it's not really anything putrid that's bothering him. Hilkach en mutar letatela lotzia, and that's why you're not allowed to actually remove it. Aval kofin ela kara b'shvil hakadan shulech, but you're allowed to put the bowl over it. The child shouldn't find it and soil himself with it. That's just how the Rav, based off the Gemara, explains that case of the Mishnah. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.